So, classroom management. First of all, classroom setup. So, seating. How are you going to set up your classroom? Depends really on the school, depends on what kind of desks, tables, seating it allows for. But you've got old school, the old rows, you've got a U shape, circle, tables and seats, and really depends on the adaptability of the classroom. So, here we can see different ways that you might set up the classroom in a horseshoe U shape with separate tables, whether it's solo work, if you were to uh, be able to move around your students, or in a circle, which would be everyone facing each other. Kind of gives a sense of equality there, or the orderly rows, the old way that most people remember school being. So it really depends on what kind of school you're teaching at, what are the opportunities there. Like I said, if you kind of got a circular or a horseshoe shape, it allows for kind of more everyone facing each other, and everyone's able to kind of see each other when they speak, which is kind of useful for learning English, where it's we're really looking to be speaking to each other and doing activities. But it really depends on what you're doing and on the day and whether you can adapt it or not. Then you've also got classroom tools. So the lack of technology has never stopped students successfully learning English. The student himself or herself is a rich and deep resource. Essentially, you can start out with absolutely nothing. In some schools, you might have no technology, no resources whatsoever, but you can still learn, or you can still teach. Then you might have just pen and paper, whiteboards and books a little bit later, and if you're lucky, you'll have language laboratories, videos, computers, PowerPoints, online tools. So depending on where you're teaching, and you're going to have different tools available to you, but even if you have nothing, it doesn't stop you from teaching. So you've got objects, pictures and things that you can use too. So realia, things like a ball, you could use a ball to throw around the classroom and get students to answer questions based on if they catch the ball or not. You got things in your bag, for example, if you were teaching kind of everyday items, could ask your students to take what they had in their bag out. Time capsule is an interesting one. The idea of what objects would you put into a time capsule. There are some limitations with realia, and that is the physicality of it. Bringing all these things into class is not necessarily ideal, but it can make it a lot more interesting. Let's say you're teaching a class on drinks or things you might order at a cafe. Well, if you can bring in orange juice and tea and coffee and cups and mugs, and it's going to make the class a little bit more interesting. You also have pictures, so you can use flashcards, wall charts, photographs, cue cards being like smaller information cards, or projectors. You can use these pictures for communication games. You can use it to do a Pictionary game or play charades. It's also good for understanding, concept checking. So you can show an image and say, well, what is this? And they'll tell you what it is, and so you know whether they understand it or not. It's also used as a design feature for course books. Having an image there, a picture there, helps show the context of what's going on, can provide more. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so it gives course books a more interesting look about them. You can also use pictures for prediction, so you can look at an image and say, well, what's going on here? What do you think is going to happen? And a discussion as well. You can look at an image and say, well, what do you think is going on in this image? So I like to start off my class and say, well, look at this image. What do you think is going on? What do you think is going to happen? Using it as a point of discussion. So you can also use cards, traditional cards, suit of cards. You can play card games like Snap. You can play Go Fish. Those are all card games that are not for English learning but can be adapted to English learning. Pelmanism, the memory game where you have to find pairs of cards using your memory, is another interesting game to play. It's quite common, and you can use them as cues as well. So you could say, well, number one, you have to say a sentence. If you get number two, then you have to use a verb in a sentence. If it's three, then you have to ask the teacher a question. If you choose number four, you have to ask a fellow colleague a question. So you can use traditional cards in the classroom. It's quite good fun. Games, word games, games that again weren't designed for teaching English but can be easily used. So Scrabble, obviously, if you don't know Scrabble, that's a spelling game on the board. It's a good one. There's also the junior board, which helps for younger learners. Jenga's a fun one where you can, when the students are taking blocks, then they can either say a word or use a sentence or make a question. Boggle's a fun one too, for finding words within letters, within a group of 16 letters. Using dice as well. Dice can be a real fun way to play games. So let's say you roll the dice, and if you land on number one, well, then you have to make a sentence with he. If you land on number two, then it's she. Number three, it's we. Number four, it's they. You can use it as to kind of create some unpredictability into whatever you're doing. Charades is a good one for practicing vocabulary as well as Pictionary. You can just adapt these games for the classroom to review what you've been learning. Articulate or Taboo, that's a really good one too. So you put a word on the board and a student's facing away from that word, and the other students have to describe the word without using the actual word. Word ladders is similar as well. Is an old school game of starting from one word, and you have to get to another word, but you have to find words in between in order to get to that other word. And Upwords as well, which is similar to Scrabble but a bit more flexibility. Check all these games out. Order them off your online, or if you've got some at home, you can bring them to class. They're really quite good ways to have fun in the classroom. Course books. So course books are pretty standard for schools to use. There are benefits to using course books. So one point is that it's like a roadmap. So it takes you from A to B to C to D to E to F to G, all in one kind of route, one map of how to get there. They are reliable, so you can trust in the publications. Cambridge, Oxford, you know that what the content inside of them is going to be very reliable, and you can trust the content essentially. Students can see where they came from and where they're going, so they can review what they've already learned in previous lessons, and they can also see where they're going, so they can see the progress of what's happening. And for teachers, this coursebooks also reduces planning for the teacher. Essentially, all the information is in the book, so you don't need to create anything yourself. There are some limitations though. So one, it imposes learning styles. So books are obviously they're visual, they're text-based, but they might not take into account the other intelligences. They might be too focused on those traditional learning styles that we talked about in the previous lecture. They may overuse standard methods, so PPP, which we'll look at in lesson planning later, but it's this just overuse of the same kind of lesson plan. They're also unpersonalized and globalized. So these books were written, in London or in New York, and you may be teaching in Southeast Asia or somewhere in a village in Southeast Asia, and these books are not tailored to those specific students in that specific village. So they're quite globalized, and they don't take into account local cultures, and that's why they need adapting. So what can you do if you have to decide whether to use the course book? If you decide, yes, I am going to use it, then you decide, well, am I going to change what's in it or not? If no, then you just leave it. If you want to change it, well, then you can add to it. So I might like to add like a review game before we start in the books. You might want to rewrite some of the information in there. You could replace the activities. You don't have to use the activities in the book, but you can replace them with your own activities. You can also reorder the activities. You don't have to necessarily start from point A. You could do B and then A and then C. And you can reduce as well. Sometimes there's just too much content. You're never going to get through all of it in the course book, so you just reduce what you're teaching. If you're not going to use the course book, then you just simply omit it, or you replace it with something else. So you've also got the whiteboard. The whiteboard is a really whiteboard or blackboard, wherever you're working. It's super useful to have a whiteboard. It helps with describing pronunciation visually, explaining things visually, grammar concepts like timelines. You can also use it to point out errors and say, hey, look, this is where the error was made. You can also use whiteboards for games. They're just really useful. I would say that you want to use colors as well with whiteboards when you're describing or explaining the different colors that you can use. That helps for the visual learners to see the difference in the differences that in whatever you're teaching. We'll look at this how to use the whiteboard as we talk as we go on a little bit later with lesson planning and whatnot. Later, you got managing your students. So people fail forward to success. So failure is necessary for success. The more we try to avoid it, the less successful we are. Failure should be embraced, not avoided. So you've got to develop a climate which celebrates failure and where students learn to reflect. Essentially, we're in a classroom, so this is the time to make the mistakes. You want to encourage those mistakes because that's how you learn. In the real life, you don't want them to be learning to be making the same mistakes. So the point is that the classroom's the practice, the safe place in order to make it's the dress rehearsal for real life. I like the analogy of it being the classroom is like the greenhouse, where it's a controlled environment, whereas the outside of the classroom is like the jungle, where there are lots of different types of English and accents and lots of things going on. In the classroom, it's a lot more controlled. So it's okay to make mistakes in the classroom, and you've got to tell your students that it's okay, good, well done for trying, give them encouragement. Don't laugh at them when they make a mistake, but celebrate mistakes and say, good, well done for trying. Not quite, but keep going. That's how you learn. So we have two reactions when we make a mistake, two signals. The first one is, oh no, I made a mistake. And the second signal is, okay, what do I need to do to fix it? So if you can focus on that second signal, that to say, okay, we've made a mistake, that's fine, but actually what's important is what do I need to do to fix it? If we have our students focus more on what do I need to do to fix it, then you're going to encourage this learning by making mistakes, the remembering of the mistakes, because if you don't remember your mistakes and you keep making the same mistakes, well then essentially you're not learning from that mistake. So a clear no, when a student says something wrong, and you let them self-correct it. You want them to self-correct it, not somebody else. So you don't want to correct it for them. You want them to think, okay, what do I need to do to fix the mistake I've just made? The brain is a muscle. So telling your students that your brain can grow and get stronger. Neurons in your brain make new pathways or connections when you learn. Exercise is good for your brain. When you learn something that is challenging, keep practicing. This helps your brain get stronger. So, using that analogy in the classroom to help your students realize that practice is important, doing their homework, doing the extra worksheets, every little action is flexing the brain, the muscle, and making it stronger. Maybe they're just not aware of that. This idea of learning takes time. It needs, these connections need to be formed over time, and it takes practice. Teaching optimism. An optimistic brain is a happy brain. So practice daily gratitude. If you've got happy students, they're going to appreciate, life in general. They're going to be optimistic about the future, about the process of learning. They're going to want to learn more. One way of doing that is to practice daily gratitude. You can do that with your students. Say, okay, guys, what are you grateful for today? As well, as a teacher, it's important that we are grateful for this opportunity that we have to teach English, for example. When we are a native speaker, it's such an opportunity that we have, and we've just been born into it. So we should be grateful for that, and we should teach gratitude to our students too. So looking at success and failure now, around here, however, we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. That's Walt Disney. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games, 26 times. I've been trusted to make the winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Michael Jordan. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Thomas Edison. So, experience success and failure not as reward and punishment, but as information. When you succeed, you can see what you're doing right. When you're failing, you can see what you're doing wrong. It's just information that you can use. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just information that you can use to advance your life. So it's not just you as the educator to have this kind of growth mindset of working towards something bigger, something better, continually learning, preparing yourself for the future. It needs to be with everyone, with the educators, with the children or the students and the parents. It needs to be all encompassing. Everyone needs to believe that growth is essential to progress. Anchor activities are ongoing tasks that a student can do when classroom tasks are completed to enrich learning. So sometimes you have these faster learners in your classroom and they finish before everyone else. So what you can have them do are these anchor activities that will, rather than just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, they can get on with more additional work. It may be an extra worksheet that you've already printed off for them, or you could have them doing an ongoing task like a writing journal. If they finished early, then continue in their writing journal. Formative assessment about the brain. So this is interesting. It's when you're getting your students to kind of assess where they are, getting them to think about themselves. So they can write down after a class, for example, 3 things I learned, 2 things I have a question about, and 1 thing I want to learn about. So I want you to do the same thing as the student here. 3 things I've learned so far, 2 things I have a question about, and 1 thing I want to learn about further. Dealing with disruptive behavior. Well, if you remember, if we do have interesting, dynamic, fun activities and lessons, then normally behavior is controlled. But sometimes, especially with younger learners and bigger groups, it's hard to do that, and you do get disruptive behavior. So what can you do? You can write down names on the board and call people out and say, right, you're going on the board, and you've been called out for being disruptive. 3 strikes and you're out. You might need a 10-minute break. If you're not going to listen, if you don't care, well, you're not going to disrupt everyone else's learning. So go and step outside for 10 minutes and think about, how your behavior is affecting others. You can obviously use rewards, which is better than punishment really, but try and incentivize your students to work hard by offering rewards. If things get real bad, you can call the parents or ask the administration of the school to call the parents and let them know about what's going on. And also there's the opportunity to have a one-to-one with your student after class and say, maybe something's going on in their lives, personal lives, that's having this effect, but it's best to sit down with them and on your own and not do this with other people around you. Do it with them one-to-one. Praise all over punishment, no? So growth mindset over the fixed mindset. So if you just say, hey, you're so naughty, then there's this idea of this, it's a permanent trait, and I'm judging them. If you, rather than that, you say, you need to improve your behavior, that suggests that you're saying you're a developing person and I'm interested in your development. So your wording is very important about how you don't get into this fixed mindset about how we can change. So don't say you're so smart, say you work hard in class and it shows. Teaching points. So other points about the teacher, your proximity to students, how close do you physically want to get to them? You're in an educational environment, so I think you need to respect people's space, especially depending on the culture you're teaching at. One of the safest things you're going to be monitoring them around, and you're going to have to get quite close anyway to your students to check their work. But if you might want to touch your students in the way that to bring their attention, but you want to touch their forearm and that's about it, nothing more. Nothing more that might be intimate. Obviously, you want to keep that very conservative, and so the most conservative place to touch someone is on their forearm. The appropriacy as well. So how appropriate, are you being? Are you talking to your students as if you were their mates, or you were at the pub having a beer, or are you recognizing that you're in an educational setting and you need to have a certain amount of appropriacy? If you're teaching kids as well and adults in different ages. Your movement as well, how are you moving around the classroom? Are you sat down? Are you standing up? If you're standing up, you obviously it's a lot easier for you to get to students and monitor them. If you're sat down the whole time, how does that also portray you as the teacher? If you're going to have less energy if you're sat down, whereas if you're going to be up, stood up, it's going to give you more energy, give you more accessibility to your students. And awareness of your classroom, awareness of what's going on, awareness of the relationships in your classroom, the seating arrangements, how someone's sitting next to one of their best friends and they're talking the whole time. How can therefore you bring your awareness to that. You say, okay, these two are talking a lot together, so maybe it's best that I split them up. They say people are better behaved when you as the teacher, you set the seating plan. When you let them choose themselves, then they're actually more likely to be disruptive or not pay as much attention. So you can use your control to set where people sit. Your voice as well is important as a teacher. So you've got teacher's voice. You've got, like I said, it's not like you're at the pub with your friends on the weekend. You are going to check your voice as a teacher. So the audibility, can people at the back of the room hear you? Are you mumbling or are you speaking clearly? The variety of your voice as well. Are you very monotone and not trying to make it interesting, or are you emphasizing important points? Speed is obviously going to be really important when you're teaching a language. How fast are you speaking to your students? Again, depending on the level, you're probably going to want to slow down your speech, not unreasonably, but certainly it's not like you're just with your mates in London, you're just having this kind of chit chat sort of thing, and you're not really too worried about how you're speaking. And the conversational aspect of it. I mean, are you speaking in colloquial language that is very specific to where you're from? You alright, mate? How's it going? Sort of thing. Or are you using more formal English? Because you're teaching, essentially a mix between the formal and the informal. But there's either way, you don't want it to be extremely informal or extremely formal. Kind of a balance in the middle. TTT versus STT. So we have student talk time and teacher talk time. So you're going to be managing how much of the speaking are you doing in the class and how much of the speaking are they doing, the students doing. The students need to be talking because they need the practice more than you. So there's this debate about TTT, and usually most courses will say you want to aim for about 60 to 80% STT over TTT. But it really depends on the quality and the appropriateness of the TTT. There's definitely benefits of TTT, but it needs to be of a certain quality, and it needs to be appropriate to what the students are learning and their levels. And more about TTT and STT later. Or using the L1, so their first language, your student's first language, there's definitely potential value in it. You can it helps think about meaning and construction. You can show how similarities between languages, cognates, false cognates being words that are similar in both languages. You can show how syntax, so the order of the words are different, between Spanish and English, for example. You will help with aspects like pronunciation. With Spanish, your B and the V is the same. They don't really differentiate between those two sounds. So you can help with explaining these aspects when you know about the L1. So this is not referring to traditional grammar translation methods. This is not, okay, we're going back to the olden days and we're just going to copy out grammar explanations from English, from Spanish to English or whatever. It's just about using it as a kind of a cheat. You can, rather than spend 10 minutes explaining what information means, if you can just say it's the same in English, in Spanish, but it's with a different pronunciation. You might also, it's also a cheat with time, for timing essentially. You might, with setting up an activity, if you can use the L1 for a lower level, I'm talking basics here, it just saves time to set up these activities, so there's less confusion and they can just get straight to practice. This, however, is limited to monocultural classrooms. So you can only really use the L1 if everyone in your classroom has the same L1. So if it's a Spanish only speaking classroom, then you can use it to your advantage. However, if you're teaching in London, for example, where you might have a Turkish speaker, a Chinese speaker, German speaker, you're not going to be able to use Spanish to help. So you also don't want to abandon the English speaking environment. English should predominate, but I'm not against it. I do think translating, showing direct translation can help, as long as it's not overused and abused. Students have come to learn English, so you shouldn't be speaking in Spanish to them the whole time. There is a tendency to want to do that just because you want them to understand, but you've got to remember that the point is they've come to learn English. Grouping students too, as managing the classroom, you might do, usually at the beginning of the class, you've got the whole class together, so you're presenting information, so um, you're getting them engaged at the beginning, but then you're going to transition to potentially group work and pair work. If it's a collaborative task, if it's something they need to do on their own, then you could do solo work. And I also like this class-to-class idea that you can mix classes together. So if you've got a class, a colleague of yours is also teaching a similar level to you, why not bring those two classes together? It's quite interesting. It means that they make new friends and they get to practice with new people. I've seen quite a lot of success with it, and it definitely helps to build relationships and rapport and can be quite effective. So, level up. You have mastered classroom management. I want you to do that, the informative assessment. So, 3 things that you've learned from this, 2 things that you have questions about, and 1 thing that you would still like to learn in the PDF attached. So, see you in the next one.